Yeah, it looks like we're still trickling in. We'll probably give it maybe 30 seconds to a minute and then we'll get started. So everybody feel free to relax. This is definitely a low key. We want to make sure that we have ample time of Q&A. So if you need to grab yourself a drink of water or anything like that, feel free to do so.
Yeah, and
And
depending on how many people it might be, I'd love to just get a brief intro, especially if it's small,
Mhm.
of just everybody with a brief introduction of where they live and their kids. Um,
Oh yeah,
just
I
get
think we could
okay,
probably do that.
since there's not a ton. I don't know how many more
Yeah.
people were.
Actually, one, two, three, four. I think we might have almost everyone. I think there's a couple more people that may have registered, but then sometimes life happens, but
Happen.
that's why we record as well. So,
No
all right,
worries.
well, we are 1 minute past the hour, so let's go ahead and get started. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Casey Craig, and I am the executive director for the Cute Syndrome Foundation. I have two amazing kiddos. I have Lincoln, who is 13, and I should probably say and a half, right? We're getting to that age where you have to have the half on there. And then my SCNA warrior, her name is Stella. And she is 9. And it is through my journey with Stella that I have, started this position. And I've been executive director for a couple years now. And our Meaningful Change series, we typically do in the spring, but we're actually kind of elongating that a little bit into spring, summer, or honestly, whenever we need something that the community is asking questions about. So, one of the things that we noticed on our post gathering survey, and then we had another survey of like, what are some topics that you guys would like to hear about? And education resources came up several times. And just general questions that come up in our support group. There's a lot of different questions. And even coming up to this, we decided to ask the community. And there was a lot of different questions about nursing and IEPs and things like that. And so I thought, you know what? Let's try to find someone that really knows what they're talking about. And I remembered Blake's mom, Nora, and she had talked about a situation that they were having at her school. And she said, hey, I have this amazing advocate. And so I remembered that even like a year later, it seemed like. And so, Laurel, that's how we came into contact. And we are so excited to have you on today. And it sounds confusing. Just it is essentially like what's state, what's federal. And I think that this will give us a general overview and then we'll have some time for some Q&A. And honestly, if we need more time, Laurel has already said that we could do a educational advocacy, 2.0 instead of 1.0. So we can absolutely do that if not all of our questions are answered today. So Laurel, I will hand it over to you to introduce yourself and we can get started because I know we have lots of fun stuff to talk about.
Great. Thank you, Casey. Hi, everyone. My name is Laurel Collins, and I am first and foremost, I'm a parent of 4 children, two with significant special needs, one with autism and one with a metabolic disorder. And I also went back to school to earn my master's in severe special needs after my kids were in school, and I had started the advocacy journey for my own life and my own family. And now I have been a classroom teacher. I have done a lot of workshops and training for the Department of Public Health for a variety of different of just health initiatives for students with healthcare needs, autism, Down syndrome, school nursing. I was just part of a pilot study through MGH for training school nurses to deal with students in inclusive setting in classroom settings. And what I most enjoy about my job is I enjoy that I get to work with some great families on behalf of some wonderful kids, and bring the tools for advocacy, and as far as what students need, holistically overall, because you have a home team of medical providers and maybe therapists and all these other people outside, and then you really have the school-based IEP team, which is really one piece of a child's programming, especially when you have a child with a lot of complex medical needs as well, and trying to bridge that gap, which there sometimes is, of how to have everybody, how to most effectively get everybody on the same page. And when I was thinking about this presentation, you know, between state law, and federal law and all the different federal special education regulations, in the laws on both levels, as well as, you know, even districts can have their own, school districts can have additional protections, in addition to all the acronyms which live in special education, you know, all those abbreviations that you never thought you ever wanted to know, and you probably never wanted to know, but now become part, of, you know, of what we talk about when we're talking in the you know, in the special ed lingo. So my plan for tonight is I just have a handout that I'm just going to go through, you know, and you know, I'm going to go through in section by section. I'll share screen. You can definitely feel free to jump in, and ask a question, um, related to the topic that's there. I definitely want to leave some time at the end for general questions. I know that Casey had sent me some questions that people had, which I will do my best to answer. I just need to say the disclaimer, I'm not an attorney. Don't play one on TV or here on this webinar, and I don't know every state special education regulations. What I can speak to with ease, is, you know, I've done training for our national organization, the Council of Parent Advocates and Attorneys. I know the federal special education law, and a lot of the ins and outs of it. And we're currently in kind of a little bit of a strange place, with everything I'm going to share, because some of it is enforceable and some of it's not particularly enforceable right now, but I'm going to do the best I can to give a brief overview. But what would be really super helpful to me, is just so I know, kind of who I'm talking, to, and is what, if everybody just wanted to just let me know where you're from, what state you're from, and your child and their age, and just a short intro. That would be really helpful to me, because I will be able to, I think, more effectively tailor what I'm going to say. So, is that would that?
Yeah, I think we have I mean, we don't have a ton of people on here, so I think we could do that. Do you want them to jump on camera or chat or whichever one they'd feel more comfortable with?
Yeah, whichever. Yeah, and I'd rather a conversation than chat, but that's okay. They don't
Sounds
have
good.
to. Yeah.
Well, I can go ahead and get started as we have our you know, people trying to figure out how they want to answer the question. So my daughter, like I said, is Stella. She is in the third grade, and she has had an IEP from, you know, day one. She is a medically complex child, so she has a G tube. She has an eye gaze system because she's nonverbal, wheelchair bound. Um, Multiple seizures, sometimes daily. So lots of needs there. And we live in Southwest Missouri.
Wonderful. Thank you. Awesome.
All right. Who wants to go next? The brave soul that comes on camera first. Or if they want to just come on. Oh, yay, Michelle. Hi.
So my name is Michelle. I have two kids, Charlie age 2 and then Henry age 5. He's my kid with SCN 8A. He's relatively complex. He uses a wheelchair, but he is also ambulatory. He can have multiple seizures a day. Like that's the funk he's in right now. He can also be very sleepy. Sometimes he eats orally. Sometimes he eats via his G tube. And yeah, that's Henry.
Awesome. What grade is he in kindergarten?
So we are working on the transition to kindergarten, and
Awesome.
it is proving to be a little tricky.
Got it. Got it.
Yep.
Well, thanks for introducing yourself and him. Awesome. And thank you, Mary, for your introduction in the chat. Um, is there anyone else?
Well, you know me.
There we go.
Yeah.
Hi, Nora.
Hi. You know me. You know Blake. My older son is Daniel. He's going to be a senior in high school. My God. And Daniel and Blake is going to be a freshman. And he is complicated and uses a wheelchair. Is learning an eye gaze. And although his seizures are pretty ish under control. He has a lot of respiratory issues. We usually end up in the hospital a couple of times a year for it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nora, and I adore Blake, so gotten to know Blake a little too. So thanks for coming and introducing yourself again. Michelle, if you could just put what state you're in the chat too, that would be great. And Tracy, thank you for you're from Maine. Oh, and you have a 2-year-old nephew. That's wonderful. I'm just putting states here. So
And
okay,
hi,
people.
I'm Nicole, and I'm in Southeast Washington, and I have a 13-year-old going into 8th grade. And she has SCNAA, but more of the behavioral needs and autism, ADHD. And for us, we've had trouble with accessing inclusion time, extended school year, not being able to access camps that are particularly designed for special needs students. I shared and yeah, so she's 13 going into 8th grade.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay. So I think that's, and Mary, thanks again um, for um, for your introduction. Okay, so I see we're representing Missouri, Ohio, Massachusetts, Washington State, and New York, it looks like. Did I miss anyone? I don't think. Did I? I don't think so.
Did you say
Okay.
Maine? I think Maine
Maine.
was
Maine.
Maine.
Yep.
Okay.
Wonderful. Okay, so I know about a lot about 2 of the states here. Okay, so I am just going to screen share. I just put together a little outline of the things that I wanted to be able to go over, so I'm going to share it with everyone, and and hopefully that will be, at least something that can help guide us. So Casey and I were trying to figure out what to call this, Educational Advocacy 1.1.0, and I came up with an advocacy alphabet soup because, all these different letters, abbreviations, acronyms, the heck do they all mean? We're going to go over some of that. What rights does your child have under the IDEA and Section 504, which are both part of our federal special education statutes? What types of accommodations and direct instruction, which is really teaching, are required to be available under the federal law and regulations. We're going to go over the disability categories, although I don't know how much time we have to spend on that, if that's a concern of anybody's. And that just, again, I want to really say this, and I'm going to say it often, that the federal law is it's not the gold standard. The federal law, think about it as the serviceable Ford or Buick. Not that you're going to get a Lamborghini or Mercedes, version of special ed in any state, but think serviceable for federal law. Think, and think about that Ford or that Chevy, or whatever. Think about that as the base model. You don't have the bells, you don't have the whistles. It's just what the basic things are, and they seem impressive when I read them, but it's really quite basic. And then I will explain a little bit more what they mean in practice, and what states do very differently. So the federal special education law is called the IDEA. It stands for the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It's been around since 1973. It mandates that schools meet the needs of children with disabilities and provide them with a free and appropriate public education. You've maybe heard the word FAPE before, in the least restrictive environment. LRE, back to our acronym soup. So a free and appropriate public education consists of different components. Under the IDEA, we have all these different things. So free and appropriate means no cost. Appropriate, again, we're talking about the basics. Appropriate isn't the gold standard. We used to have what's called a maximum feasible benefit, at least in our state. That's gone. So that was, what does a child need to meet their potential? Now the services are what does a student need to access the curriculum that their similar age or developmentally developmentally similar peers would be able to access. So those students who don't have disabilities, what does a student with a disability require in order to access? One of the components to that is appropriate evaluation. I think this was one of the questions I may have gotten. So per federal special education law, every student has the requirement with parental consent to be evaluated every 3 years in every area of known or suspected disability. That's the language in there. So if you put in writing, and I always suggest to the director of special education, but definitely in writing, I try to keep it to formal letters, not the biggest fan of emails. I like attaching letters to emails just because I think emails can turn into chains, and sometimes I like to keep formal requests pretty formal. But if you put a request in writing for an evaluation, your school district and the student has not been tested in that area in the past 12 months, they are required to test, or the school district is required to bring you to due process in any state, which means they kind of have to sue you, or it's not really suing, they have to bring you to an education court to try to prove why they don't have to evaluate, which I've actually never ever seen done. I see that happening when parents are asking for something called independent evaluations, but I've never seen a school district in my career refuse to evaluate, and I do believe that that was one of the questions. So I would always say, as long as that evaluation, and you can be very specific, the request for the evaluation or assessment, you can say, I'm worried about my child's this isn't, you don't even really have to give an explanation, but it is oftentimes very helpful to include that. So whether it's, a behavioral assessment, OT, vision, kind of anything like that, there's no reason that the school district would legally be allowed to say no. And what the other piece of this is called prior written notice. If for some reason, say they had just tested it or there was an extenuating circumstance, they're always required to put in writing anytime a school district is saying no to you for anything. I want my child to have more inclusion. I want my child to have an aid more time of the day. I want my child, this is, any request you make, the school district is required to, and it can be an email now. COVID did a lot of very, change the way that we do communicate. So everything isn't always in a form as it used to be. I mean, we used to have special education files, which, were 1,000 pages long for some of our kids. And a lot of it did go electronic just because that's what we had to do during COVID when we were having IEP meetings and such like that. But each and every time, whether it's for the IEP, any sort of IEP documentation, progress, anything like that, they are required to write why. Why, if they don't agree with you. They don't have to agree with you. I would hope they do, but if they don't, they have to write why. Okay, so they can't just say we don't want to, or we don't think it's necessary to do an evaluation. And then each state does have its own dispute resolution system, which again is going to be state to state. And except for civil rights issues, which are federal, discrimination, if you're when we're looking at failure to follow special ed regulations, even if they're coming from federal law, your first level of line of defense is definitely your state. Lawsuits are different, civil rights issues are different, and bad news there is our Office of Civil Rights are now all closed. They've been shuttered since the beginning of this year. So if you do have any of those more pressing civil rights needs for your student being discriminated against, X, Y, and Z, you really don't have a place to go right at this moment. But there is that protection. There is an Office of Civil Rights, which exists. It is temporarily shuttered. But let's not focus on that. Children have a right to be educated in the least restrictive environment. What that means is that their services should be provided in the environment with the maximum level of supports to allow them to be with students without disabilities. So this is why it can be it can be a wonderful thing for many kids. Many parents I work with, including of medically fragile students, want their kids in mainstream classrooms. And, when it's done well, it can be done beautifully, and kids can really thrive in some of those settings. I would say, especially when they're younger. Just even with the medical needs and potentially with the extra staffing, I always find that not only is it amazing for the student who has the disability to just be one, to be one of the bunch, one of the gang, right, in the classroom, and not feel, and not feel having to feel different or warehoused or something. It's really what research has shown us is it's amazing for all the other students. When we don't have to teach inclusion. We put students in inclusionary settings, and it helps the students who are typically developing without disabilities just as much as it's as much of benefit to them as it is to the student with the disability. And where we're finding um, some of the lags of that that being successful is teaching. We're finding that teachers, not necessarily saying it's an age thing, but it's kind of an age thing, that the teachers who are um, newly going through. I mean, I teach a course at BU at Willock, the Willock School of Education. Inclusion is a whole different way of thinking. Even when I started doing this work 15 years ago, 98% of people easily who came to me, maybe 95, wanted their child in an outplacement. They did not want their child in their neighborhood school. They wanted their child in a specialized program in school. And that my job was to work and help put those pieces together to get that child outplaced. And now I would say that might be 25% of the families that come to me, especially, and usually it's kids who are a little bit older who have done inclusion, and things generally can fall apart in middle school, late elementary, and certainly by high school. I think a lot of those settings don't work for a lot of students. So least restrictive, and this is what school districts will tell you. We have to put them in their LRE if they're fighting outplacement. And this is what it is, because we're going to offer you, at this point, the school district's usually offering you so many different supports. But remember, the one thing I always say, if it's in an IEP, that's great. We can have a perfect looking document. It's how that document is implemented and if those things actually happen. Okay, parent and student participation. When students are over 14, they do not have to participate in their IEP meetings. They are supposed to be invited to their IEP meetings if they can give meaningful participation. What that typically means for even older students. I mean, and you can have a younger student come too, I guess. There's nothing prohibitive about that. But usually kids, they'll come in at the beginning or they'll come in at the end. They'll do whatever form of communication they do, whether it's, to sign in or to whether it's using iGate, however their communication system is. But in general, what I found is that kids don't really want to be in meetings, even if they are the center of attention. I always say the student or the family are the most important people there, but it's really hard too, because IEPs, but in and of how they're written, they're not strength-based. They are very much deficit-based, and that's how we write them. We write them based on your delays. We write them based on how do we remediate. We write them based on your percentiles and your test scores and how you're performing in school. And those can be really hard conversations for kids to hear. I wouldn't want to be there and hear people talk about all the things I need help with, because there's one little section that talks about a student's strengths, just one tiny little one. And the rest of it is really focusing on, well, how are we going to help the student? What supports do they need? Parents always have a right. So by participation, you have to, each and every time an evaluation assessment occurs, you need to consent to it. You can consent in part. You consent, can ask for specific test batteries. There's all sorts of different things you can do. A school district can, in a rare occasion, if there's a student who is really, usually it's behavioral, needing extra supports and the parent doesn't consent, you will find school districts who will take the parent to the education court to say that we really you know, the parent is being unreasonable, you know, and that happens a lot, because it can be very, but if you want your child again initially to get evaluated or for any other area, they're required to do that. Procedural safeguards are simply, I always say I used to just be the bathroom I could have wallpapered. A little different during COVID because I didn't get a hard copy. One of my kids was still in school on an IEP, but then it all went electronic. But anyways, it's the parents' notice of procedural safeguards, which I'm sure each and every one of you has been given 18,000 times, unless you only have little kids and maybe that's only been electronic, but usually you have to sign to say that you've at least initial and received it. The new law is that they don't have to give it to you at every meeting. They just need to make sure it's on record at least once per school year. But that just is their way of saying that here's a packet of information, and if you don't like what we do, here are all your rights, here are all the places you can go to disagree. But really, please come to the team first. Come to your teacher, come to your special education chair, come to your special education, your principal, special education director, because they really don't want you going anywhere. They don't want you going anywhere else. But the IDEA and Section 504 are the two disability related laws in this country. So IDEA is for special education, which is specially designed instruction and related services. Both laws require somebody to have a disability. However, Section 504 is about equality and access. It's not about providing, first of all, it does not include related services. It doesn't include speech OT, nursing, kind of things like that. It is more about, you know, say a child's in a maybe in a wheelchair, you know, is the school environment, do there need to be ramps, do there need to be elevators accessible? You know, if a child's on crutches, does there need to be extra time to go between classes? If the child has an allergy, which doesn't affect their education, do they need to be sitting at a table, which is, say, nut-free, or doesn't have allergens at it? So it's much more about equal access. Section 504, I should also mention, just doesn't apply to schools. It applies to the way adults function in the world, to your business, to businesses, to it even goes into housing, because it's really just about equity and equality. I don't want to say equity, I want to say equality, and just to make sure that everybody has you know, the same opportunities. You know, if you have a seeing eye dog, that dog should be able to, a service animal, that dog would of course be able to then, you know, go with a student or a person about their day. So that is a little bit of the difference. So the difference is, the big difference is that all IDEA students are covered by Section 504, which is just have to have a disability. 504 students are not protected under the IDEA because many people have disabilities that don't affect their ability to that don't affect their ability to learn effectively, meaning that they don't need specially designed instruction, how we teach, modified work, things like that, or related services, OT, PT, speech, nursing, TBI, services for vision, O&M for mobility, so many different kinds of services there. Everything does need to be tailored to the child's unique needs and results in an educational benefit. And I love how it says tailored to the child's unique needs, because, well, that can be very difficult thing sometimes. The one place that I always suggest parents go, there's a federally mandated parent training and information center in most major cities, definitely one in every state. They are required to be available through the federal government. Nobody has shut these down yet. Ours is called the Federation for Children with Special Needs here in Massachusetts. They support families from early intervention age, so infants, newborns, up through ages 26, which is a little bit past transition age. Some states transition at 21, some at 22. They support parents. We have basic rights trainings. I train for our federation here. A lot of policy building. I helped develop a brochure that we still use in Massachusetts for every family, because all kids in early intervention don't qualify for IEPs too. Only about 70% do. So it's really your parent support agency. They are definitely they are working, even though they really are advocating for students, they also work with your state Department of Education. So they're supposed to be non-biased. But that's not necessarily the reality that I've seen, but it's a great place to go. And when Casey does send this out, when we get this into a happy looking document, I do have a link here so you can find your agency depending on where you live. And it's a grant, which again have been given out this calendar year. They've certainly been funded. We have not seen, and again, they're funded by also private donations as well. So I know here in Massachusetts, we're not having any issues, about that. So the technical assistance, there are also places you can call to get general information about a special education regulation or law, and what that might mean, as you know, and you can talk about what your child's issue is. They can't give legal advice, but they can certainly give clarifying advice. I just wanted to put the disability categories. Again, I don't want to really spend time on this unless anybody had a question. These are the federal categories. Ours are different in Massachusetts, but in general, we're going to look at autism as its own category, deaf blind, deafness, emotional disturbance. It's now called SED in Massachusetts, which I think is pretty self-explanatory. Hearing impairment, intellectual disability is, we're looking at an IQ. We're looking at an IQ score, and that the adaptive performance is not likely to change. One thing we do learn about ID and even IQs is, absent, say, in general, things like a traumatic brain injury or something which is physically regressive in nature, you're really not going to see a lot of fluctuation in basic IQ scores. You're going to see different numbers sometimes with the test they're using. There can be some fluctuation, but really one's capacity to learn, except if you do have a degenerative disorder, which I know is the case here, that could change that score. But that's really what ID is, and it's a much happier name than mental retardation, which is what it used to be called. Multiple disabilities, pretty much self-explanatory. Orthopedic impairment, we don't use that in this state. Other health impairment, which could be 18 million things, including ADHD, is the one we definitely use mostly. Here, specific learning disability, we're thinking about dyslexia, we're thinking about dysgraphia, we're thinking about we're not really necessarily thinking about brain, and I don't like this I'm looking at this, I'm not really I'm not really agreeing with this. But anyways, think about it as dyslexia. That's the way I look at SLD. Speech or language. Communication is what it's called here. Traumatic brain injury, again, it is its own category. And then visual impairment, including blindness. So Massachusetts has different ones. We don't have to go through all of those. I did want to go through some of the alphabet soup here that will help also clear up what's federal, what's state. Section 504 we already talked about. Augmentative and alternative communication. I'm sure AAC and AT are terms that I'm guessing everybody in this webinar knows. AAC, the ways that somebody communicates besides talking, and low tech, high tech, kind of all of those options. I think I'm hearing that many students here are using some of the more high tech options as well. Speech generation devices. We're looking at technology as really being key to how a student is communicating. My daughter actually teaches a Perkins School for the Blind. So she uses a lot of combination of AAC and AT, which is assistive technology, which we'll get to in a second. ABA, applied behavioral analysis. I do know that behavior can be a component of that many of you are in different levels. Every kid is different anyways. ADD, ADHD. I don't know why they have alcohol and other drug abuse here. I'm going to just take that one off. Auditory processing disorder, autism, ASL, assistive technology, which is a piece of item equipment software that will help somebody's functional capabilities. Sometimes I think about it as software. I think about it as communication boards, board maker strips, picture communication, things like that. It is a different, people wonder what the difference is. And the difference really between AT and AAC is, I believe, it's sophistication of the way the communication devices are used, and most students use a combination of both. And many students have both an assistive technology and an AAC specialist who work on their teams or at least consult. Adequate yearly progress is how we look at, one of the ways we look at how districts perform, but also how we're looking at progress reporting. BCBA, board certified behavior analyst, behavior intervention plan, blind, visually impaired. Something that every state has and may have a different name is the CYSHCN, which is this children and youth with special healthcare needs. I am going to, if your doctor's office, neurology, any of the specialists hasn't put you in touch with that program in your state. Here it's run by the Department of Public Health. It is a really good resource. Sometimes it includes funding. We have the Mass Start program, which is having school nurses go into schools, registered nurses from Children's Hospital go here, and that's who we use. But that are able to go in and consult for free. These are all services for students who have significant medical challenges. One of my kids has a seizure disorder, so we've been able to see that work as well. We have deaf, blind, hard of hearing, daily living skills, especially as students get older, even depending on you don't have to have, there's always ways which we want to ensure that students are included, whether it's you know whether it's not just laundry, it's not just dishes, it's not just running a cash register, a school store, things like that. It's really the nuts and the bolts of how do we, what are the things we need to do as we're getting older, whether it's dressing, whether it's bathing, whether it's washing hands, whether it's, any of those things. How much support do we need? Because obviously we want what we teach kids in school to go back home too, right? Doesn't work for anybody if a child can do one thing at home and can't do it in school, or can do it in school and just can't do it at home. So that's the other thing that federal special education law tells us, is that it's required that skills that are taught be generalized between home, school, and community. So you really want to ensure that and that's why home services can be part of IEPs and things like that as well. Okay, due process hearing, that's what I call school, that's school court. That's education court. I've actually argued there. You don't have to be an attorney. It's called the Bureau of Special Education Appeals here. A hearing is much like a trial. It's a little bit much less informal, but it's where you go. We had about 900 requests for hearing filed in Massachusetts. I believe 27 of them went to full hearing last year. So very few go to hearing, and they're usually over very, very, very expensive things, like outplacement. I've gone to hearing process with my own kids. Gosh, I think I filed like 7 times, but for clients many, many times, and they generally get resolved. Emotional disability, early childhood, executive functioning, early intervention. I'm assuming everybody's kid here has gone through early intervention, which are, the services that are birth to 3, but can go birth to 5, depending on the state that you're in. English language learner, I'm not seeing that as an issue here. But so ELL services are required to be part of special education and IEP if the primary language spoken at home is not English. Extended school year, big one, that's what we call summer school. And the purpose of extended school year in the federal government is to ensure a continuum of educational processes. In Massachusetts, they say it's to prevent regression, but that's actually not what the federal law says at all. It doesn't have to be the exact same program, but it does have to allow continued work on IEP goals and benchmarks, and should not have a significant decrease in hours, because again, it's not meant to be maintenance of skills. It's meant to, there's nothing that says it can't work on progression, but a lot of districts, they do this thing, which I don't, it's not all. So one thing, this would never happen if you're in a private day school, because private day schools run year round. So you're going to get the same services. You don't even have extended school year. But in public schools, if you get speech 4 times a week, like, oh, we'll just do it twice a week during the summer, or, something like that. And there's really no basis for that. And if you actually, one of the things that I do, is that I bring up their licenses. What does ASHA, what is the, associate, for speech and hearing and audiologist, what do they say about that? Because you can't just change the frequency and duration of services without data to prove or disprove. So that's a battle that most people just don't want to have for summer. Free and appropriate public education, again, you're not supposed to pay anything to have your child receive special education services. Functional behavior assessment, I'm sure that's a term we all know. The Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA, that means that all your child's educational records, this is a federal law, you have access to them, that they do not, that there needs to be a log for anybody accessing them at whatever office or location they live in, and that the school district is not allowed in any way, shape, or form to release any of that information to anyone absent a court order, or if you're a police officer, or child protective services would be the only other thing that I could come up with that would have access to that without parental permission. Your child's records are your child's records. It also means that you are able to ask for access to those records at any time, and they can't withhold them. That would also include emails, teacher notes, daily communication sheets, text messages if your district has staff communicating about your child in that manner. It actually includes a lot. So when I do a records request, for a lot of students, I am getting 500 pages of emails that sometimes are highly redacted because they might mention other kids, so they have to redact names of other students. But just remember, anything that's about your kid is part of their record. Most districts don't do a great job with that, but the ones I work in, who they have advocates working in, generally do. We talked about what intellectual disability is. We already talked about the IDEA. We've talked about an independent educational evaluation. An evaluation is obviously what the school district does. You have a right to an independent evaluation at the school district's expense if you don't feel their testing was adequate, okay? And you put that in writing, and they have to fund it. As long as you quote the federal special education law. Let's see, these are life skills, No Child Left Behind, OCR, the Office of Civil Rights. Again, we talked about that a little bit, about the fact that they're paused at the moment. These are a lot of the agencies which are federal, and we always want to make sure that we have present levels of educational performance in an IEP. We want to make sure that the specially designed instruction, how are we teaching the student? Are we using applied behavioral analysis? Are we using, are we breaking down, are we using, how are we breaking down, how is a special because only a special education teacher can design this specially designed instruction. They can train a para, they can oversee a paraprofessional assistant, anybody like that. However, it's a teacher who has to be the one who's designing it, who's modifying it. And that's something a lot of districts don't do. Okay, nursing, skilled nursing. So this is where I don't see it all the time, skilled nursing. So if your child requires that one-on-one nursing, or just say a school nurse in the building or anything like that due to their medical needs, it needs to be documented in the IEP. It's supposed to be documented in the IEP. I don't always see it documented in the IEP. The reason it's supposed to be is it's not funded by the school districts. It's funded by Medicaid. It's reimbursable through Medicaid, and there's a whole lengthy, application that is that gets processed by the school department. And I believe that those nurses do get paid by the school department. However, that's a Medicaid paid service. So that is really for one-on-one nursing. So I know most of my, many of my students do have one-on-one nursing. And all of my students who have medical needs have a school nurse required to be in the building. And I think it really depends on what the needs of the student are. And those are just some of the talking points I wanted to go through. So I'm going to stop the screen share and and then go over some of these some of these questions.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, because we have about 15 minutes or
Yep.
so left. And I know some of these, we kind of converse back and forth via email, but we might even have more. So if you're here in the meeting with us, if you want to throw some more questions into the chat or come on screen, feel free to do that as well.
So, right. So absolutely. So, the first one is, I don't know the student, if there's the reasoning between going from general ed to special education classrooms, that's something that has to be agreed to and consented to by a parent. And when that happens, your type of placement would change, but your service delivery grid saying where a student receives services would also change. And if you've not signed that, they're still required. It's called stay put, even if you disagree with what the district is. Say you do disagree. I don't want my kid to be in I don't want them so segregated. I want them to continue to be. Usually, it's easier. It's to like this, continue to be in science, health, history, all of that, if that's still able to be done with appropriate supports, or even not, because that's the first thing the school's supposed to do. The first thing the school's supposed to be doing is how do we make that work? How do we make that meaningful access? You have stay put rights to it. So they really can't. It's a hard question, because if that's where they were, there was a document that had to have been signed that went back to say, here's this kid who's going to just be in a special ed classroom. They might go for specials, lunch and recess or something like that, right? In inclusion, and it leaves it very up and down. So I would say that your ability is to go back and to look at that last IEP, because if that's a placement change. It's the percentage of time you're out of the general education room. Nicole, do you want to jump in there? I'm wondering if is this your question?
Yes, it is my question, and it's
Okay.
like one of many. And so yeah, this was me. And so my daughter's now going into 8th grade, and this all happened in 1st grade, was going essentially from 90% general to 90% special or more. And that was just a big shift. And that because she had to walk to her resource room, and then they had to go to the next classroom, or the resource person then had the next person to go to. And if they had like 20 minutes, it took 12 minutes of transition and only 5 minutes of work. She wasn't getting her her needs met in the general education, and that's why she went into special ed. And but then you have so many kids with so many behaviors that feeds on each other.
Oh yeah.
So it's like, how to get as much inclusionary time as possible.
They
And
can't.
then once she was in the special ed class, like accessing general ed was difficult at times because like, you know, there's like a teacher and a couple paras and like, oh, well, a para is already helping another student at that time, so there's
Know
no
how
one
to,
able to act for your kid to access general ed. And I know there's funding issues across all the country, and you know, including Washington, but also like, you know, it's just been an uphill battle for so long.
I think what, you know, it's obviously, I mean, I don't want you to ever worry about funding because your kid is your kid, and like there's money is always going to be an issue no matter where you live. Washington State doesn't do the best job. I have a friend who moved to Washington from Boston, and her son is 25 like mine, and has a lot less supports than we do. So I can imagine the uphill battle, but really, I'm hearing it is a resource issue, but I'm not worried about the money. I'm hearing it's a human resource issue. And the way to address that is to advocate for a one-on-one for additional staff person. So whatever they have, their little pie of people, right? That they have. Not if your child needs something in order to access more. Well, they're going to have to hire a position. They're going to have to do things a little bit differently. And this whole thing about travel time, I mean, I don't know how big the school is, but to me, 12 minutes is a long time to be able to get from one room to another. And it sounds like there was a lot of,
Well,
sometimes kids
it
feel
wasn't
fatigued.
the distance, it's my daughter's behaviors. When behaviors is the main issue, and you know what, you know, it's like, why couldn't the staff go to her instead of her having to go to the staff?
That's not okay. So yeah, I mean, the staff going, but that's still not going to be in an inclusion setting. No, I hear you. I
Yeah.
think I think that having somebody come in and see her in school, saying this is what she needs, them telling you, and they're, if they're stupid enough to put in writing, we don't have the staff, well, that's on them. That would be evidence for you to use. um but if that's what she needs, and there should be a positive behavioral intervention plan in place to hopefully cut down on those challenges, right? It sounds like they need to do a functional behavior assessment too, and you probably should be calling an IEP meeting to ask for that additional staff member, very specifically put that in writing, make sure that's an active, an action item, which is active on their agenda, because you have to make sure they answer it. And then the language you would use is, I want prior written notice, which is what they're required to do under federal law. Again, it's what I talked about at the beginning. If they say no about anything, they have to put it in writing. So that's how I would answer that. And I hope that helps a little bit. Speech and language testing. So I've addressed this. If you are requesting a reevaluation, who cares that they didn't qualify? Truly, I don't. 5 years ago, that's insane. 5 years, that's might as well. Yeah. So you have a
Thank
right
you.
to
That's
have your.
my question as well too. So yeah,
Okay, so
it's just been
every year,
a
once
full
every 12 months,
uphill battle, and
you
we
have
just
to.
we just finished seventh grade after a horrible sixth grade year. They finally offered her a one-on-one, so we finally got a one-on-one for seventh grade. But you know, it's just, I I wish things could go smoother than they've been.
You need to put the request for speech and language testing in writing to the special ed director, because they can't say no. So they can tell
Okay.
you.
Okay, thank you. Because yeah, I asked that question a couple weeks ago. You know,
You
right at the end of
everything
school,
in
and
writing.
they told me no. Yes,
Okay, so let's
yeah,
forget the
I
tell
do
it.
everything in writing.
Everything in writing. If it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. That's how, that's the way that I function. Okay. So I hope that helps. Specials, inclusion depends on the student. I really can't, it's certainly the same level. I can't answer that. It depends on what your child's needs are. Obviously, if they have additional staff in the other classroom, they would need additional staff. They would need to be modifications potentially. Sometimes we would have the special ed teacher come and work with the specialists. I'm not really sure, about that. Nursing and medical support, is the school required? They're required to if your doctor has, so this is where it gets a little tricky. So I say so much that it's up to the school team. It's not really just up to the school team. If you have a child who is medically complex, I wouldn't, seizures don't get you a nurse, a one-on-one nurse, a G-tube medication, and these are all different things and they all have different levels. I have kids who are on G-tubes and they go for feeds at the nurse. They don't have a one-on-one nurse. They don't need a one-on-one nurse. They go and they get a feed, or they have somebody who's trained to do it in whatever setting that they are in. My daughter had a seizure disorder, now resolved, but she did require a full-time school nurse in the building. There was a requirement that she had to have a nurse every field trip they went on, kind of things like that, because nobody could give a rescue med but a school nurse. So again, a little bit different. Medication administration, you need an LPN or a nurse, unless a child's older, and at that point they could self-medicate. Like, I have students who are in high school, things like that. There's difference if you can take if you have a kid who takes Ritalin and they're 16, they're able to do that, by, independently, without, usually still in the nurse's office, but they don't need somebody to give it to you. Like say one thing that you don't need a school nurse for is an EpiPen. You can have a teacher's aide, a paraprofessional, a teacher, somebody who's trained to administer that. The class goes on a field trip to a farm and you get stung by a bee, God forbid. You don't need a school nurse for that. A private duty nurse attends school with a child.
Can I interrupt and ask a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
How do you suggest approaching the team member when your child's needs are not being met and the school is asking unlicensed professionals to do tasks that fall under the requirement of a licensed professional?
Like, give me an example.
My son, who is 5, is going to preschool right now with 10 milligrams of midazolam in his backpack that the school nurse will not keep in a lockbox.
That's ridiculous. That sounds to me like that's a complaint to your Department of Public Health, if not your local health. Honestly, here it would be your local health board too. That is absolutely not, the in the district itself should have a school nurse lead as well.
I talked to the director of nursing who said this is how extended school year runs. And I told her that
that's how we go back, and that's how it runs. And that if that's not something that is safe, that is something.
Right. I told her I'm concerned not only for my son, but for the other special needs preschoolers in his classroom. Like 10 milligrams of a controlled substance that could put another child into respiratory depression and kill them.
Yeah, Michelle, we can talk after this. I'm happy to talk to you a little bit more. That's a big one.
That's like the tip of the iceberg that I'm dealing with. And it's just like today they told me that I don't need to send his AAC device to school anymore because they're not planning on using it.
Sounds like I need to come help you find. Yeah, I need to go to Ohio and help you out.
When am I coming tomorrow to teach everyone how to use his AAC device, because not communicating is not an option.
No, he has a right to communicate, and just like, okay, yeah, we can talk after.
Yes.
Private duty nurse. You can't just send in your own private duty nurse, but again, it's a covered service under Medicaid, so that should be something that can be figured out. Medical assistant instead of an LPN or RN, nope, that's not allowed. No state allows that. That falls very clearly under the Department of Public Health regulations that do come from the federal government and the Health and Human Services, which at this point we have not been changed or cut, thank God yet. No, you cannot have a medical assistant. A medical assistant can go for a 6-week certificate, 6-week to a 6-month to a 10-month certificate class, and you don't hold the same type of licensure. Disagreements about needs. yeah, a letter from a doctor doesn't do a whole lot, unless a doctor's come and observed a neuropsychologist, somebody like me who's a master's level educator who can come and do an observation. You're going to have to find, it's helpful to find someone else because sometimes doctor's letters, they look boilerplate, sometimes they're too short. Yeah, there's a whole different level, because they're talking in general and they probably write letters for 25 kids every month on their caseload. So it's not so much overriding as levels of support get a little bit different, like one-on-ones and even about therapies. I would just be cautious about which provider, and what their expertise is in working with school districts, because some do work very well with school districts. My son's neurologist works beautifully with districts. Okay. And yeah, so those are the questions in the chat, and if I might have time just for one more question, if anybody had something that hasn't been addressed yet, I'd be happy to try to answer it for you. I know that
I
was
was even thinking as we kind of wrap up, I'm curious if you can. You touched on it in a couple of different times, but let's say you are not agreeing with something with a school or you feel like they're not handling it appropriately. Is there almost like a step by step, like you need to go to the special ed teacher first? Like, is there a hierarchy that you need to go through, or
yeah,
there's certain circumstances
or
that no, you beeline to someone else?
I think it depends honestly on the way you're. Sometimes there are org charts, right, which you can find on a district's website that will say if you have a disagreement, about this, and this. Also, I think it's dependent on what the severity of the issue is, right? I wouldn't bother going to the teacher and the team chair if it's like a safety thing, right? Or something like that. But in general, the way that I would always suggest is I'm big on writing things down, not in emails. I like letters that I can put on emails. And then if you really have tried to have, you've had a meeting or you've and it hasn't worked, I would send it to the special education director. I would CC the principal. And then the next point of contact I would do would be the superintendent, who oftentimes, well, obviously oversees everyone, isn't always helpful. And sometimes, depending on, I'm not sure they can intervene directly, but I've seen them I served in our school committee. You can certainly, you have more weight than just, you have more weight when you are on the school committee if a parent approaches you, because then you do have a direct line to the superintendent. Does it mean the superintendent's going to listen to you? Not always, but it's always something. The other thing is, if depending on the severity and your child's need for your desire to protect their privacy, I always hit the parents.
Earbuds, but they stripped everything else, just work on good sound. So they sound really good, but like they don't have a microphone or anything, but that's fine.
Oh, Nora, I think you're.
I think that
I'm
was
not sure if that was. Yeah, no worries.
I think that, going and speaking your truth and speaking about your child, you don't have to use their name. At a school committee meeting during public participation, that's another thing that I do suggest parents do, especially if it's systemic. Something like I don't want to tell Michelle what to do, but I can talk to her. I mean, that to me is safety. We don't put controlled substances in backpacks. That's just ridiculous.
Right.
But that might get to that level for me. And then each state has a complaint resolution system, which I will also put in a link to that and that document, and it's dependent on state by state. And that's where you would go file a formal complaint. Typically, they get resolved sooner rather than later if you have staff, which a lot of states don't right now. But if there's a specific thing in the IEP that's not being followed. It's not so much about a disagreement about needing or wanting different, but if something's not being followed, you can file a complaint, and you always have both the federation, in each state. The final thing I will say also has an advocacy and protection center, which is not always, it's not just schools. Like the Federation of Parent Information Centers are for parents. The Disability Law Center is a federally mandated consumer protection center for Massachusetts. There's one of those. It does do education law as well. That's always a place that will take a limited amount of pro bono cases, for example. but usually they do have hotlines where you can talk to an attorney for the day and things like that, and at least get some free advice.
Yeah,
So
that's I was kind of curious, like at what point in this process should or when, would you recommend someone hiring an actual advocate to come and help
I
them?
I think honestly, hiring an advocate, I think for any transition, I really do believe, especially with kids with the needs of this population, I think it's really, this is why I say this. Early intervention is it's parent and child focused. It's very family friendly. It's all about, it's strength based. It's, you're talking about outcomes and strategies. You're not talking about goals and benchmarks. I think that for most families, especially when your kid is pretty complex, it's a good idea to hire somebody, for that initial. It's so different unless your EI program has the most angelic of people who are going to stay with you. I think it's good because it doesn't show the school district you're trying to fight with them. What it shows is that you're educated. And then I think when you feel, I think for a transition period, that's a good thing. I also think that any time that you just feel like you're not being heard or you're not, you're being shut out, maybe emails aren't getting responded to, or people are being flippant, or people, aren't, addressing, the needs. People are getting bad communication or no communication, because we're talking about a lot of kids who can't talk and tell their parents about their day, things like that. I think that an advocate, especially, my style is I can get along with anybody and I smile and I don't yell at people. That wouldn't be helpful to a student. It wouldn't be helpful to a family. It wouldn't be helpful. I want my parents to feel like I can, we can play good cop, bad cop as much as we need to. They have to work with the schools, but they also have the right to get as emotional as they want to. They're parents. I'm a parent and I have brought advocates with me to my kids' meetings, and I've cried and I've bawled. Maybe I've yelled, maybe, because it's my kids. And like, I think that passion is good. I think an advocate can just be that person in the middle who doesn't take the school district side, but if they think I'm trying to take their side a little bit and I'm actually coming together and getting my client what they need, that's fine too. I'm really good at just kind of that that personality thing, because they know very clearly that most advocates they're not like me. So I have a master's degree in severe special needs. I've been in a classroom. I have a, I have a pretty high level of, you can be an advocate in math. You can be an advocate if you just say you are, and you don't need any training. So I would always look for, just to follow up on your question, I would look for somebody, if you are looking to hire an advocate, they don't need to have 18 million degrees. They certainly don't, they should be reasonable. You should not be paying an advocate what you pay for a lawyer. I've heard of advocates charging $150, $200 an hour. That's insanity to me. I didn't go to law school. But you want somebody who has a relationship, who has experience with your child's disability, first of all, and I know we all have to start somewhere, but who has familiarity, who has a good network of mentorship of other advocates and attorneys that they work with, who continues their professional development, and most importantly, you want somebody who can give you really good references. You want references. And don't just go on their own website, because anybody can put anything on a website. You want to talk to other families. And one of the biggest things that I have learned, and I'm very blessed by, is that I have teachers and team chairs and principals in districts recommending me to families, because sometimes they can't do as much. But that's a pretty high bar. So to say that, okay, if this is what you need, this person I've met, and they're going to be able to, you know, come in and be effective. So I think word of mouth is helpful, and just don't always count on social media. Literally try to talk to other people, and remember that you are your child's best advocate. You are your child. You know your child better than anyone. You are their voice when they can't use their own. In all these, big meetings where we're talking about their life and their education, and that the best thing that I can do is I can help empower parents, and I can help teach them, and model for them some of the strategies that I use. And it's not a marathon. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. Nothing happens quickly, because it took a long time generally when I come into the picture for a situation to end up happening. But once we have a systemic strategy, I would say that, kids do thrive, and kids are able to access the setting they need to be in. Some parents want their kids in inclusion, some parents decide they don't want their kids in inclusion, and that transfer can be hard. Some districts don't want kids in inclusion. It's just this very strange parallel, but you are your child's biggest cheerleader. They are the love of your life, and I'm sure vice versa some of the time, except you can have a teenager, and that's a whole different thing. But I just want to say that it's wonderful that you all are here, and that you want to learn more, because this is the job you didn't want. It was the club you didn't want to be in. But I'm sure I know for myself that autism club, and kind of all, and even having a medically complex child, it's a club I'm very grateful that I'm in, because I've gotten to meet a lot of wonderful parents and professionals who, came before me. And then I can just share some of what I've learned, and I get to go help kids every day, and that's pretty fun. It's not a bad job to have. It can be frustrating, because I really care about the students I work with, and I just try to do the best thing I can for all the families that I do work for and all those kiddos. So thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming. I really, really appreciate this. And I know all the families do too. And thank you for everyone that came and who submitted questions, because I know that you're fighting every day for something, right? Whether it's school resources or it's, medical resources, all the things. And so I'm just sending all my love, and hoping that this is helpful. Also, we will get you out a documentation with all of this information afterwards. Feel free to let me know if you want another webinar, and we can ask different questions, or we can focus on something else. But I really appreciate everyone taking the time to come today. And I'll shout out to our sponsors, Neurocrin and Praxis. Without their help, we wouldn't be able to do all of this. So really appreciate it. All
Oh,
right.
wonderful. And, my number is in the chat as well. Michelle, feel free to reach out to me. That seems to be a pretty significant need. But yeah, always happy to help. And you can share any of my contact information, Casey.
Wonderful. I will send that out too. Awesome.
Wishing you all a good night. I have a kid to go put to bed myself.
Sounds great. Thank
Okay.
you. Bye-bye.
And Michelle, you can email me too. Casey will share both of those. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, whatever works best for you. Like I told the school, I was like, I'm not sending it in his backpack. So like he's not going to school with a controlled substance in his backpack.
Yeah. Well, you can call, I can talk as soon as I get my kiddo to bed. But yeah,
Okay.
we'll talk soon. Hang in. Where in Ohio are you?
Medina, so Cleveland suburbia.
Okay, cool. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you again.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.